Welcome to the Changing the Conversation Q&A series. This series consists of 4 parts, each of which expands briefly on the questions raised during the Changing the Conversation webinar series, which consisted of 4 webinars providing invaluable insights to framing, hot topics related to implicit bias towards aging, and tools from the National Center and our partners. Before we begin, I'd like to introduce the National Center to Reframe Aging, the trusted source for proven communication strategies and tools to effectively frame aging issues. The National Center is dedicated to ending ageism by advancing an equitable and complete story about aging in America. We are the nation's leading organization cultivating an active community of individuals and organizations to spread awareness of implicit bias toward older people and influence policies and programs that benefit us all as we age. With us today is Dr. Barbara Bowers, Dr. Jasmine Travers, and Dr. Maura O'Neill, all of whom presented during the Reframing Nursing Home Care portion of the webinar series. Thank you all for joining us today. During the webinar, you all shared such interesting and important information, and participants had many questions. Dr. O'Neill, one of the questions that brought up a lot of conversation was around the desire to begin changing perceptions of nursing home care, which we know is a big task. But the audience wanted to know, how can we begin? What can one of our first steps to address the public's negative impressions of nursing home care, especially post-COVID, what would one first step be?
Sure. So I think what's really important, while always acknowledging the problems that are impacting the current system, is to point to very concrete and specific places where the system is working, where we are seeing quality care, where we're seeing the workforce taken care of, where all of the things that you guys are working towards. And I think it's not just enough to point to those examples, but to give some explanation as to why that we have these examples of really high quality care in certain places. And one more step is to point to this sort of policy and systemic reasons why that might be. So I think often when we are talking about places that are really sort of beacons of hope of what nursing home care could be, we often focus on the individuals in that institution, and that's really important, right? But what is surrounding that in that particular home to make it work as well as it's working? So, and again, the idea here is not to be Pollyanna-ish about the system, and again, acknowledge those problems, but say we do know how to do this, and it is happening in some places, and here's why it's happening.
Wonderful. Some good tangible next steps there. Dr. Bowers or Dr. Travers, would you like to add anything?
I think, those are great points, Moira. I think there is clearly some positives that are happening. One of the things that has been happening is much more public attention. Now we have to work well with that, because that could certainly create an even more negative position. But I do think there's been a fair amount of public support for people who work in nursing homes, a realization of how challenging the work is. And so I think it's in a sense a perfect storm. The Biden administration, for whatever reason, is looking at this now. Haven't heard a lot lately, but I'm hopeful. And I know that CMS is clearly engaged in important reforms, and there's a huge group of stakeholders around the country, including a number of nursing home resident groups and family caregivers, who are all really looking at this issue now. So, and I think the shift, I hope the shift from quality, just focusing on clinical quality, to quality of life, a real expansion of that, which has been endorsed everywhere in the information from the White House, in CMS, to really expand how we look at long-term care and nursing home care, to say, this is about people's lives, not just the clinical indicators that we've selected. And I think there's a real shift going on there.
And just to tie in both what Maura and Barb just mentioned, I would say that celebrating the wins, the successes, really showing where nursing homes are doing great things, where they're doing fun things, where, people are living their best lives. So showing that to the public, as opposed to these common just reference to nursing homes where things are just poor with the quality of care that residents are receiving and the environment. It's not all bad, but that's what we commonly see in the nursing home space. So that's what we're going to think. So just showing more of the beauty of nursing homes as well when those opportunities present themselves. And then kind of going on to what Barb was saying when it comes to all of these initiatives that are happening to improve nursing home care delivery and improve the environments, really communicating that to the public as well, and not communicating that in silo spaces. So that's something that we recognized at the original conference, Gerontological Society of America, where we presented, I believe, and I talked about the recommendations from the NASM nursing home report, and someone from the community raised their hand and said, oh, wow, like, why don't we know anything about what's going on, what these recommendations are? So just important things that are happening. We should make sure that other people are getting this information too, so that they can remain hopeful and excited about what's to come, and not to think that it's a dead end when it comes to nursing home care and quality of care.
Can I also just say, I would like to send out an invitation to any person who is connected with the media, who has the ability to put something in the media. We don't get positive stories. I have talked to a number of journalists, and there's not an angle of sort of horror there. I think the media has done a huge disservice, and they could remedy that if they would have a look at. There's a lot, as Jasmine was saying, a lot of homes that are doing wonderful things. Why don't we have any stories about that?
Absolutely. And that's something that Dr. O'Neill will remind us of frequently in our work too at the National Center, is remind people of what you want them to imagine, what you want them to be thinking, what you want them to be speaking, and show them that. So I think your comments really underscore the importance of that, and just the joy that comes in sharing those successes and stories. I think in saying that, there's no shortage of acknowledgement of the challenges that this sector is facing. And Dr. Travers, you've written about workforce challenges as one of the primary areas of concern. How can management teams at nursing homes begin to improve the working environment to increase staff recruitment?
Yeah, so there's a number of things that administrators can do, nursing homes can do. One of the pieces that I wrote from this original session was related to how do we make nursing homes the best place to work? So making it creating just this environment where people are excited to come to work. And what does that look like for the staff that are there? What is it that they need? Whether it is just free snacks during the day, free coffee during the day, maybe places to work out, thinking about just well-being. What types of well-being aspects are we incorporating into the nursing home space that we can, feasibly incorporate? Thinking about just benefits that are important to staff, like childcare and transportation, just implementing those within the nursing home space. But then in addition to that, just also thinking about like our hiring practices. Turnover is a huge issue within the nursing home space. So how do we create an environment where turnover is not as high? And again, making it a better place to work will help with that. But then also thinking about our hiring practices. If we could hire within, if we can hire more referrals, then those people are more likely to stay longer. And those people who are there, if they're happy in where they're working, they're going to tell people, as well, like, this is a great place to work, come work here. Thinking about the advancement and training opportunities, that's always something that's being spoken about by certified nursing assistants, for example. They want to grow, not just in the profession in general or to other professions, so from like CNA to RN, but within their own profession. So what types of opportunities are nursing homes providing CNAs to do that? Where some of it doesn't necessarily need to be tied to money. I've spoken to CNAs and they say, oh, they're a lead CNA and they actually don't get paid more, but they said it's not always about the money. So that's something just to think about, like, are there different types of pathways that can be incorporated? But at the same time, thinking about wage increases and what types of opportunities, financial opportunities can facilities leverage to help support these increases, whether it's state labor programs, for example, or other programs or workforce programs that support these increases. So those are some of the things that I would say. And then another thing I would say also is just thinking about, the burnout of staff and the demands. How do we kind of incorporate technology a bit more into the nursing home space to alleviate some of the work that staff are doing that doesn't need to have staff doing all of those different types of tasks. So for example, scheduling, maybe technology can support those efforts so that we can free up staff so that they can be in other places and not feel so bogged down, so that we can increase just the idea of consistent staffing where staff are able to be with residents on a more regular basis, the same staff. So just things like that we can kind of incorporate to try to alleviate just the burden or the demands that staff have, and then increase just the retention of staff as well.
Absolutely. I almost was creating a list as you were speaking of all of the different recommendations that were embedded within that. Thank you all for joining us again for this Q&A series. Thank you for tuning in, for those listening to the Q&A series. If you haven't seen the Reframing Nursing Home Care webinar featuring Dr. Bowers, Dr. Travers, and Dr. O'Neill, please watch the webinar by accessing the link to the recording in the description below. Thank you all for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.